Hey everyone, welcome to my podcast, Inside Equine Minds, where I, Caitlin Hendry, meet with various horse professionals, trainers, riders, grooms, to dive deep inside the minds of the most successful horses in various disciplines. I'll take you behind the scenes from the horse's perspective to learn about how these horses are trained and managed in a way that strengthens their mental game and has fueled their massive success. This podcast is brought to you by EQPI, or Equine Performance Identities, a personality profiling tool for horses that guides people to becoming the partner their horse actually needs. We all want our horses to be a happy and willing partner and to enjoy spending time with us. An EQPI profile gives you the information about your horse's individual needs and motivations so you can adapt the way that you're working with them to ensure just that. And should we decide that we're just not the best person for our horse or circumstances lead us to having to sell or lease, EQPI is a great tool for sharing what your horse's temperament is to ensure they do get a good match with their next person. Or maybe you love your horse so much that you want more of them and you decide that you want to breed. An EQPI profile provides invaluable information about temperament, so you can really make sure you're looking at the full picture when you're choosing the best stallion or mare for your horse. In today's episode, we will be talking all about Hilton, who is a 2007 Belgian warmblood gelding. He is a jumper turned hunter and has just been killing it in the hunter world. In 2023, he and his owner Keely McIntosh Minturn, who's also my guest today, had an amazing year. Not only did they end the year as the USCF Grand Champion Amateur Owner Hunter, but they also entered in 3 international hunter derbies and won 2 of them. So needless to say, I'm very excited to talk with Keely about Hilton. But before we do, let's do a quick overview of Hilton's EQPI profile. In order to get the profile, Keely took the EQPI assessment online, which you can find at www.equineperformanceidentities.com. It's like a 10-minute online survey, essentially, to give me the inputs, which I then use to create the personality profile for the horse. An EQPI profile looks at 4 individual spectrums of behavior, and then in addition to looking at those individual spectrums, we look at how those spectrums relate to each other. And this is really what brings out the nuances in the gray area and really helps us understand that horse's specific individual profile. These 4 spectrums are called independence, which is the horse's preference to control or comply, extroversion, which is the horse's preference to interact or isolate, stability, which is the horse's preference for predictability or variety, and then structure, which is the horse's preference for clarity or flexibility. The 2 spectrums that really stand out in Hilton's profile are his high extroversion and his slightly high structure. For the high extroversion, these horses are much more animated. They wear their emotions on their sleeve, so to speak. So they're usually very good communicators because they don't really like to hide their feelings. So you know exactly what they're thinking when they're thinking it. They are also usually more social. They like to be in the spotlight. They like getting attention, etc. For the structure spectrum, high structure horses get confidence from depth of expertise. They like to know what the right answer is. They like things to be very clear. They want things in sort of black and white terms. Now, Hilton's independence and his stability spectrum are both considered situational. So in order to understand how they really show up and the behaviors that we'll observe, we need to look at how those spectrums relate to the other spectrums on the profile. So let's dive into the relationships. The first one that I will point out, which is also the strongest relationship, meaning these 2 spectrums are the farthest apart in his profile, is the relationship between his high extroversion and his situational independence. This relationship means that he is more other-oriented, and so he is going to care more about the relationship and not be so task-oriented. Another relationship that really will influence how he connects with others is the relationship between his high extroversion and his situational stability. His extroversion is higher than his stability. And when we see that relationship, they usually are much quicker to want to connect with others, and they won't hesitate so much to want to approach and say hi. Although, because his independence is situational, he may not be as sort of brave and in your face about it. And also because he's high structure, they tend to take a little bit more time to trust, so there may be some skepticism initially. Another spectrum that is higher than the stability spectrum for Hilton is his high structure. When the structure is higher than stability, these horses are more rule-oriented, and they also tend to do better in a program because of that need of clear expectations from that high structure. And so he'll really want to know what the rules are, and once he knows them, he'll really want to stick with them. And that includes a routine and knowing what to expect every day. The last notable relationship in Hilton's profile is between his high structure and his situational independence. When the structure is higher than the independence spectrum, these horses are more risk averse. And so we may see some more spookiness. We may see some hesitation if they are doing something that they don't know how to do, because they really want to make sure that they are mitigating any risk possible. If you want to see Hilton's profile in more detail, it is available on the Inside Equine Minds Patreon account. And if you want to get a profile for your own horse, check out our website, which is www.equineperformanceidentities.com. Now that we have the same understanding, sort of basic overview of Hilton's profile, let's hear directly from Keely as far as how exactly she works with him in a way that honors his personality and has helped him achieve the success that he has. Keely, you have had Hilton for basically a decade. Given that amount of time, what is the thing that you look forward to the most about working with him? What do you love about his personality?
Yeah. Well, the way Hilton is so successful in his career and personally is, in my opinion, through how big his personality is and the fact that we're able to kind of like harness the positives and bring out even more through his strengths that he lets us know. And when we first got the horse, he had a lot of personality. He's very expressive, and when he used to express himself, it was probably not the most positive way. He was very studly, those that personality trait, those that come with stallions, very much applied to Hilton. And now, when he gets those moments of excitement, I feel like that same energy has been harnessed into more positive things. And if he ever wants to be, in air quotes, bad, it's more it's more structured, I think, in the way that he gets to express himself, but he still thinks that you're in control. So he's not getting away with this dangerous behavior that he was before, but he's still allowed to express himself. So to answer your question, one of my favorite things about Hilton is how big his personality is and the fact that I've been able to get so much out of him for it. If he didn't have as big of a personality as he has, then I don't think he would have been nearly as successful as he's been with me.
And when you say big personality, what behaviors are coming to mind?
Well, there are so many behaviors, but
I'm sensing a lot of good stories here. You're leaving me hanging.
so many. And honestly, I have to contain myself. I don't feel like it's easy to explain until you experience it. I leased him out this last year to a good friend of mine who she was there when we got Hilton 10 years ago, and she's
Hmm.
been following him for 10 years. Her name's Jackie. And it took a lot for me to decide whether or not I wanted to lease him because he has all these quirks with his personality. And so I sent an instruction manual with him. And I'm sure her trainer was probably rolling their eyes, but it works. It works to a T. Really, to break it down, the instruction manual is how to give Hilton the most freedom of expression and the most freedom to be the best he can be in this box where he doesn't, be too far on the dangerous side of life. We're not, being studly. He's harnessing that energy in a different way. And I believe a lot of that has to do with the way you ride him and the way you take care of him. And of course, when he has these moments, how you work with him in that moment. And I think that makes the biggest difference. He's very, very picky about the people who ride him. Emotionally, if you're not his person, he doesn't want to know your emotional problems. So if you're his person, he becomes your best friend over that. But if you're not his person, he wants nothing to do with it. So if he starts acting in a way that you are unfamiliar with, you go back to who's been around him and also kind of what you feed him. He also lives on, and I mean, in my barn at least, the total common focus. And if he wasn't on that all the time, he could express himself a little bit more than maybe he should. But during the horse shows, big fan of the supplements that help you. Anything that's legal. We're not trying to give him not legal stuff,
Right.
but controlling his hormones is a huge part of being able to compete and be successful with him. And I remember thinking when the depot became illegal that this horse wasn't going to have a career anymore.
Was he a stallion when he came to the US?
Yes, he was
He
cut
was.
very late.
Oh, okay.
But I think that in his older age and being familiar with his job and probably less hormonal, it's not as big of an issue as it was a few years ago and when I first had him. But the big personality, the people who are around him, making sure that Hilton thinks that the whole world revolves around him, very important. You don't blame him for things that go wrong because he gets very, very depressed. So when he does really well in the class, and I believe this is why he loves derbies. I used to think he was a better division horse than a derby horse, but he found out very quickly that derbies gave him more glory than divisions did. And derbies are his thing. He loves derbies. He puffs his chest up when he does really well and he kind of walks back like he has a little bit of a
Mm.
strut to him. And then, he gets all snuggly. And the more you talk about him, the more his ears are forward. He's just this overall super happy guy. Now, on the flip side of things, if you mess up and he knows that something went wrong, which he knows every time, he doesn't want to talk to you. He turns around, he mopes in
Mm.
his stall. His ears aren't forward. His whole energy just is so much more compressed. I think all of these personality traits, whether he's super excited or, a little bit upset, he's allowed to express himself. And then, going back to what I had said before, I think these are the reasons why he's able to be as successful as he is because before his, expressing himself when he's angry was rearing and striking and not being able to be led and all of these things where now him expressing himself when he's mad is him being a little bit depressed. And I will say, if you chip on him, he might land and throw a buck or two because he's
Yeah.
like, get your life together because I'm here to win, whether you are or not. But that's the worst he does now. It's like people. I think when people don't emotionally regulate themselves, their happies are much happier and their sads are much sadder. So Hilton is now allowed to express himself. I love that right now my friend has him because the only people who knew this about Hilton were me and anyone
Hmm.
who worked for me. He he did a derby with Jackie last week and she came back close to the top. And her handy, she was winning. There was no question she was winning. And the last obstacle was a trot jump and probably 6 or 7 strides to an oxer. And my fingers were crossed. Just trot the trot jump, trot the trot jump. And he did. And I was like, "Whew, he's gonna win." And he landed cross cantering. And I was like, and there goes the class. And when Jackie called and told me how mad Hilton was about it, that he was just, all of the energy was just drained.
I'm hearing so much because the high structure horses, they like things to be very clear and kind of very black and white. They like to know what's expected of them. They like to know what the right answer is. They demand accuracy.
Hmm.
So I think like when you chip in and then afterwards
Hmm.
you're just like, what the heck are you doing up there? Like you said, get yourself
Hmm.
together. And then his extroversion's his highest or strongest spectrum. That's where a lot of that expressiveness comes in. If he
Mhm.
has a little spooky moment or he's excited or sad, like it's very easy to read that. He kind of shows that externally because his extroversion is higher than his independence. Definitely much more other oriented, and that relationship matters. But that with that high structure, though, high structure horses also need time to trust. And so it's interesting to hear you say, like,
Mhm.
if you're his person, he's great and wants to have that more emotional connection with you. But it's almost like if somebody's bringing in those more negative emotions, he's like, I don't know
Mhm.
you. Like, I don't want that. That's not good vibes.
Exactly. Well, and the situational independence, his ego is very, very large, and you have to feed his ego. But he also, again, needs the structure to understand that you're in charge. And in order to be successful, he has to listen to you. And I do think he thrives off of structure. If there's not structure, don't even show that week. But
Just give up.
yeah, like it's not even worth going to the horse show at that point. But secretly back home, he knows you're the one putting in the hard work and telling him what to do. But he wants everyone to think it was his idea.
Is that the same doing things that he knows really well versus things that he doesn't know? I'm asking this because a lot of times the high structure horses, they get confidence from knowing what the right answer is. And so they can sometimes come across as higher independence horses, even if they're
Mhm.
not high independence horses, because if they know all the answers and they know what to expect, it really boosts their confidence. So I'm
Right.
curious if he acts the same as far as it wanting to be his idea, even in an environment or when you're asking him to do something and he doesn't know the right answer.
So I do think in the past, if it was new, he did not like it because he wants to know that he's doing it right. If he's confused, he gets a little bit insecure. But towards the end, obviously, of our partnership and me showing him consistently, if it was different, he would very much lean on me for the most part. When he's insecure, and he doesn't feel like he has someone to lean on. And again, that is solely based on trust. If you feel at all insecure, he's going to pick up on it.
Right.
And insecurity for him is and he is a very spooky horse. So my instructions are every step of the way you have to tell that horse what to do. You're surrounding him all the time with your leg in your hand because he needs a hand to hold. He'll do things when he's insecure, like spooking, or like when he lands cross cantering because you have to tell him which lead you land on. That is, again, in the instruction manual. He will land cross cantering if you do not tell him which lead to land on, and he gets very frustrated and sad and insecure. And it's like a kid or an adult who stands up in front of a crowd and all of a sudden gets stage fright and they kind of freeze. That's Hilton. He doesn't know what to do. He spooks at something and he's like, I don't know what to do.
I'm stuck. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And the confidence goes down, and it might not go down for very long, but it doesn't take that long for that 87 to turn into a 70, you know what I mean? When
Mm-hmm.
I'm gonna go back to now he's allowed to express himself, those moments are a half a second versus before where it might have taken me a day or two to get him to come back down from the moments he used to have, and we've come such a long way since then.
Yeah, it sounds like it. I'm going to talk about this manual a bit more. So I always love asking about, riding and training tips, tips
Mhm.
for prepping for shows, ways of managing at home or at the show, and then yeah, prepping, riding, training tips. It sounds like you've kind of laid all that out in the manual. So
Yes.
let's start with, I guess, riding and training tips. What have you found works the best for his personality? You mentioned sort of always having him between your hand and your leg a bit. What else, what other tips come to mind? Or what other tips did you literally put in his manual?
Right. I love that you ask about riding and training because I have a section titled Riding and Training. Um, and I think that it all goes back into the basis of him feeling supported and you being in charge, but it being a little bit his idea. I I think Jackie gets a little bit hard time for this, but I rode him at home in a loose ring snaffle and no noseband. Anything that can add stress to that horse's life, I would love to take it away. And there
Mm-hmm.
was a study done when you tighten the noseband, it adds stress to the horse.
Mm-hmm.
It increases their cortisol levels, I think. And I went through a whole phase where I didn't use nosebands on any of my horses. Now I'm, a little particular about which ones have it and which ones don't have it. But if you have a horse that is very high stress like Hilton, anything that's going to help bring those stress levels down, that's important. All of the training is at the end of the day, you're trying to make sure that he knows you're there for him. He does do this thing where he likes to lean on your right side sometimes. And when I say lean on it, it's not like you're trotting on a turn, he's like leaning in.
Mm-hmm.
He'll bulge his shoulder and he'll kind of like move his head in on the other side to the left. And when you put your right leg on and your right rein on, like every rider is trained to do to push them back over, that horse will start almost hopping in a way where he balls up and he doesn't want to listen to you because you're trying to force him to do something that he doesn't want to do. I could not pick up the right lead on that horse for 2 years because he would do this.
Yeah.
Like I was at the time glad he was a jumper because it didn't hurt. But it's very important now to be able to pick up the right lead.
Yeah.
And so what you do, and this is what I do with all of my horses now, because I believe horses need to hold themselves up and not lean on you anyways, and it's so easy and they don't even think they're being trained at that point. You just open your right rein and you do a tiny circle to the right until they hold themselves up. And that seems so simple and that we've learned that before, but I guarantee you 9.5 out of 10 people, anytime they felt Hilton push on that right side, the first thing they do is push back.
Right.
When he's leaning on that right leg and you push on that right leg, he pushes harder back on you. And then he just starts doing this like little crow hoppy, half trot, half canter thing. And you like the whole day becomes a mess because his day is ruined at that point. So you just don't ruin his day and you're very nice about what you ask. And if he ever does anything that I feel like is out of line, you tell him no, but you don't do it every 3 seconds. You have to pick your battles. Like if I want him, there are certain things he's not allowed to do. Lead changes. If he's a step late behind or he's a little sticky behind, that's something that I think that's really important for him to lift himself up and do because he doesn't have automatic lead changes. You have to hold him up. So knowing that that is something that I will always be a little bit harder on him for, where I'm going to say you have to step over, not I'm asking you to, you have to. These other things that he does while he's at home, I'm going to be a little bit kinder to him and I'm going to find a different way to ask him to do it.
So it's a balance.
It is. It is. Yeah, and then it's not putting him in that tight box where he feels like he can't express himself anymore.
Yeah. How much of that do you think is because he was cut so late?
I think 99% of that is hormones. Yes, I do. And he's very lucky to have ended up in a home that works with him rather than trying to force him to do something because I don't think he would have thrived as much as he does now if he were in a program that from the beginning that tried to force him into the box because he's so good at what he does and we've been so lucky to get that out of him.
Yeah. So related to management, then I'm
Mhm.
curious. Well, I definitely would love to know how you sort of prep him for
Mhm.
shows, and then how that may or may not differ from how you manage him at home, aside from riding.
At home, and again, I'm going to start with at home because I feel like you build into the horse show with your
Mm-hmm.
training and just mentally that makes more sense in that timeline. At home, again, fitness is very important. I rode 5 days a week, Monday through Friday, and we took the weekends off. I felt like that was better for the horses. So 5 days a week, he'd be on the walker in the morning for 15 minutes. Twice a week, he'd be on the aqua tread. And then once or twice a week, he'd be trotting on the Pessoa. And then he'd get ridden 3 to 4 days a week for 20 minutes. And then following it into the horse show, this horse thrives off of the Pessoa rig. And I never canter my horses on the lunge line. He trots on the Pessoa for 30 minutes. And I'm telling you, it puts the horse in the zone. He's a different horse after he doesn't really need lunging all the time, but mentally, he needs it. He puts a podcast in his head of him winning. And in the mornings, he would get fed. Maybe he would get a perfect prep. Maybe he wouldn't, depending on if it was cold or not. He doesn't love perfect prep, but he eats it.
Hmm.
And then he would go get his 30 minutes of, or 20 minutes or 10. Again, sometimes it was five, just depending on how he was, or again, the weather. If it's cold, 30 minutes would be max. If you'd been off for 2 months and you didn't know how he was and you wanted to gauge something, then he just trots with his Pessoa. He comes back, he gets his bath. Then I really found that it was important for him to stay in the zone, and he would get all of the lasers, all of the things, the beamer blanket. Again, it's his mode to sort of just get in the zone, and he would get all loose. Very important while you're getting him ready to tell him how great he is and how great he's going to do. And because he picks up that energy. And there's no secret really to getting that horse ready. This is nothing new that I'm saying that people don't already do.
Right.
But in order to get the best out of the horse, you have to put the best into the horse. And he really, again, I think the secret to that horse is putting him on the Pessoa and letting him put his brain where it needs to be, whether it's 5 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, in order to show and be successful. We keep him in a very calm environment. And as the rider, too, even if I became nervous, it's totally fine, but I don't ride him nervously. I'm not gonna pull him up at the jump because I think I'm gonna miss. When you start riding him nervous, then you can see that in his performance. You're confident, and whether you're gonna miss or not, that horse is never gonna know it's a miss unless you tell him it's a miss, you know? And he's going to think he jumped at 10 out of 10 every single time. And if you tell him he jumped at 10 out of 10, then he will. And so you go in there, you have your good warm up, you don't run into anyone. He hates that other horses breathing his air is offensive. So you give him his space.
He pins his ears or gets like shy about it or what?
He definitely pins his ears and acts like he's going to bite them. Does
Okay.
not like them
No.
near him at all. And it's totally fine. It doesn't bother me. I think that, again, making sure that Hilton knows he's a winner and it's about him that day and that he gets his time to mentally zone in, just like a lot of riders need it, then he's going to go in. And as long as you don't mess up, he has a 99% chance of winning for you. He's the most competitive horse that I've ever ridden.
I wonder that sort of ego and wanting to, he's proud after he has a good round. I
Hmm.
just am so fascinated by that because like I wouldn't necessarily look at his profile and think that. The two aspects in which I can see that maybe tying in is that high structure and like he knows
Hmm.
what the right answer is now, and because he knows that, he has that confidence from that expertise. And then also I think the high extroversion is coming into play here because just like an extroverted person, they sort of like to get attention, like to be in the spotlight, are sort of more public. Even though
Hmm.
he is situational independence, I think that
Hmm.
high extroversion's really feeding that, like I want to be in the spotlight, I want to get the attention dynamic that you keep sharing. What are your thoughts on that?
I would agree with that. I would agree with that. And, sometimes I wonder what kind of horse he would be if he didn't horse show and he just stayed at home. He thrives off of horse showing. And like you said, the high extroversion, I think, comes from that. I didn't horse show him much at the beginning of this last year. I don't think he showed until March. So he had probably 3 months just because I just wasn't horse showing.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think he liked it. He started kind of going back to his bucking for no reason. And I don't know. I do think the personality profile would change if he wasn't in that highly structured environment, always working towards the horse show. Like, I think he's one of those horses that is gonna die in the show ring. He's gonna show his whole life. I don't think he's gonna like being retired. I have one other horse. It was my FEI, my first FEI horse. I call him Pepe. His show name was Accordance. And I tried to retire that horse, and he looked really, really horrible. So I retired. And he just became a very odd horse. He was very calm, cool, and collected. You could put a kid on him when he was competing. And then he retired, and it's like he lost it a little bit.
Mm.
And yeah, so then I brought him back and I would let girls who worked for me ride him, and he started thriving again in the structured environment. And now he's at a barn in Omaha training kids, and he thrives. He looks way better now at 24 than when I tried to retire him at 18 or 19, you know?
Hmm.
I honestly think Hilton might be the same because the structure that we're talking about, I don't think he would thrive in that environment of not having something to work towards.
I wonder if some of that's that high extroversion too, because he's also situational stability, which we haven't really talked about. But
Mhm.
his extroversion, high extroversion horses do tend to be more curious and more playful. And then, especially because his extroversion's higher than his stability spectrum, they can get bored easily. And so I wonder if even though the workload is less, if he's just like, I don't want to sit here in this pasture, or I don't know.
I'd agree with that too. I think he does not like to be bored. He likes his mind to continue to think. And again, whether or not you're putting him in a grid every single day and you're not doing something new, at least he's doing something.
Hmm.
And he has something to work towards. I would very much agree with that. You know, when a lot of these horses who have competed their entire life try to retire, a lot of them don't like it because that's what they lived for in their mind. That's
Yeah.
what gave them a purpose.
And that's what they know.
Mm-hmm.
Then you take that away and they're like, excuse me, you
Uh-huh.
forgot me.
Well, and I try so hard for that reason. My horses, stay outside at night. They get out as much as possible. If it's not raining, if it's not too hot, it's not too cold, they live outside. Because I think that they should all have that experience and it helps them with that bridge to retirement. But again, I mean, Pepe lived outside with a herd of horses for a long time. I mean, herd of horses, there's probably two or three of them. And Hilton didn't live in a herd, but lives outside. And I just, they love the freedom that I think that program gives them to kind of be themselves and take a deep breath away from the horse show. And I think that is very important because you don't burn them out. But at the same time, they have nothing to live for. They don't, the structure's gone if it's just for them. I mean, there's a lot of people like that too. I thrive off of structure. I don't like coming home and having nothing to do. It drives me crazy. So it
Mm,
makes sense that it would drive a horse who also is very much the same mentality as me. It would make sense that it drives them crazy.
yeah. I want to dive into the discipline question because he started as a jumper. Now he's a hunter. He's
Hmm.
done very well as a hunter, arguably better than he did as a jumper. So, yeah, I mean, how do you feel like his personality is suited to being a hunter? And do you feel like if he could choose, like which discipline do you think he would choose?
Things happen for a reason. I fully believe that. And I don't think we would have gotten where we are today without his history. If you had met him when he was 7 years old, you would have said 100% this is a jumper. No questions asked, could never be in the hunter ring. I mean, I go back and I watch videos of me in jumper classes with him, and his hind legs are like above the standards for no reason,
Yeah.
just because he's showing off, right? At the time, the jumper life, the like a little bit more high strung, a little bit more like in air quotes structured is probably what Hilton wanted. But then, of course, he was injured in 2016-ish, not very long after I had him. Him being a hunter was based solely off of the fact when he tried to bring him back once, after 6 months, it didn't work. So he was out in the pasture for a year and a half. And my vet at the time said you could put him in the jumper ring, but he's not going to last physically. So my suggestion would be to put him in the hunter ring. When we had decided to bring him into the hunter world, he was a little bit like, might have looked a little jumpery, but I think as soon as he figured out that life was easier in the grand scheme of things for him, he didn't have to jump as big. He won a lot more in the hunter ring. I think the very first classic I ever did on him, he scored an 84. And I hadn't done many hunters
Hmm.
in my life. That was a big score for
You're
me.
like, oh, is it that easy?
Only on Hilton is it that
Yeah.
easy. I think once he figured out what hunter life was like, in hindsight today, if you could speak with Hilton, yes, he prefers the hunter ring. I don't think we would have ever gotten this opportunity if he had stayed sound, though, and he had never gotten hurt. Again, everything happens for a reason, and the reason was because Hilton needed to be a hunter, and that was the only way he was going to be a hunter was because we thought he couldn't physically handle being a jumper. And again, I don't, his injury back then was a very severe injury. It was severe enough that we all thought his career was over.
Hmm.
And now he's just, thriving in Hunterland. I mean, to even be someone that hunters were only something in my life because I don't know, maybe a jumper got too old and instead of just putting on the pasture at 17 or something and we did international derbies, it wasn't something that I ran after in life. But
Hmm.
to have a horse that was good enough and competitive enough that anytime you walked into an international derby had a chance of winning is just, it's an otherworldly experience.
Nature versus nurture wise, you mentioned you think his personality profile would change, which leads me to maybe think that, making a guess here, so obviously correct me if I'm wrong,
Mhm.
that you think maybe nurture plays more of a role
Mhm.
in the horse's personality. But I'm curious what you think of that, and your experience with all these other horses that you've worked with. How much do you think genetics and nature play a
Mhm.
role versus nurture?
When you sent me the email, I looked at that nature versus nurture for way too long, contemplating what I personally thought for that horse and in general. And the conclusion that I've come up with is the nature part of it is his personality and his talent and the breeding and all of that. And the nurturing part of it is what we've been talking about is being able to harness the power of what he's been given naturally. And I do think in Hilton, the nurture part is a lot more powerful than the nature part. But he wouldn't be as good of a horse in the show ring as he is today without everything that was given to him naturally. And again, the nurture part of being able to harness that is very important in how we get him to be successful. And again, we're talking about his personality profile changing, which goes into the nurture part. And I do think the personality would change, and it did change depending on how he was treated.
Well, can I ask? Every personality has strengths and challenges to it, right? And whether those needs are being met will influence the behavior that you actually observe. So, do you feel like his actual personality was changing, or you were just kind of seeing the flip side of the same coin because the needs weren't being met?
I actually think that's a really great question. And since you're bringing it up, I I do think that his personality was probably the same the entire time, but he just wasn't allowed to show it.
Hmm.
So him being allowed to express himself with the personality that he had, with his natural personality. And again, the nurture part of letting him be who he is naturally is how we get what we get out of him. But to answer your question, when you say it like that, I do believe he had the same personality the entire time. He just wasn't allowed to express it. And when he did express his personality, it was a lot more extreme on one end or the other
Yeah.
because he
Because you're
wasn't
like bottling it up. It's like
exactly.
shaking a bottle of soda, and all of a sudden,
Exactly.
and that with that high extroversion, that expressiveness is so important. That's his strongest spectrum, is that high extroversion. And if he's not allowed to express anything, I can imagine how frustrating that is.
Right. And I mean, we're allowed to express ourselves, obviously, to a certain degree, depending on our environment. And I can't imagine being a horse with his level of raw talent not being able to express themselves. And it goes back to the nature versus nurture. And I think they work hand in hand, and you need both to be successful, obviously. You can't have a really great, wide receiver in football if they can't run really fast or
Right.
catch the ball. But the discipline and the nurture is the training. So Hilton thrives off of the structure and the training, And that brings out the positives of what his natural ability is.
Yeah. It's an interesting distinction because people will say like, "Oh, the personality completely changed." Like, well, I don't know,
Hmm.
did it? I mean,
Yeah.
it's the behavior changed, but it could
Hmm.
be just the flip side of the same coin.
Right. I don't know very many people that have been blessed with having 10 years with a horse. When you get a year span with a horse, you're not going to know them as well as someone who's been with them for 10 years. Being able to see his personality over the 10 years, I would have to agree with you in saying that the personality was the same the whole time, but it came out differently. It was expressed differently depending on the environment that he was in.
So fascinating. We've talked a bit about Hilton's injury,
Mhm.
but you've had your own injury, a big, big injury that required some pretty major surgery and, TBI and everything. And he was one of the first horses that you came back to riding with. What about his personality helped you kind of re enter the riding space again after your injury?
You probably wouldn't think if you knew all of the horses that I had back then, you'd probably think I was crazy for picking Hilton. The injury that I had, I had one in 2012 and then again in 2020, yeah, 2022. I don't know why I was saying that funny, but and I think thankfully having the experience, 10 years prior to that helped me recover in a more healthy manner the second time. Picking Hilton and Any being the two that I started on was solely based off of the fact that I'd had them longer and that I trusted them. Obviously, I didn't pick the horse that flipped with me. And on top of it, even though Hilton, depending on the structure that he's in, can be, you don't know, sometimes you don't know what he can be like. At the end of the day, he is way more reliable, and so is Any than any of the other horses because as long as you did it correctly, he would come out the same horse every day. And I knew that horse wasn't going to stop with me. I knew that horse wasn't going to throw me into the jump. I knew he was going to get to the other side every single time. And same thing with Any. I think I cried. I mean, I for sure cried. I walked in and did a classic on him, the first horse show back after all of that, and he scored an 87. And that was, I mean, I hadn't shown in so long.
Yeah.
And at 3.6, scored an 87. And I was like, this horse, that wasn't me. I mean, part of it was me. I had to point at a jump and not be dumb. But the horse loved to compete. Picking him to be one of the main horses that I rode, there was no brainer. Bringing him to the horse show and having the solid partnership that we had is what changed everything. If he went in there and he tried to buck me off or stop because my confidence was low, I probably wouldn't have ridden after that. I probably would have just given up and thought, this is the world telling me not to ride anymore.
Hmm.
But the fact that his confidence was so high when I needed it to be is what gave me more confidence coming back to the horse show ring.
And you had that relationship. I mean, it sounds like he was a little bit more willing to kind of shoulder the burden
Right.
initially while you got your confidence back. He's like, "I'll carry you for a little bit, mom, but like you got to get it back soon, but I'll carry you for now."
Exactly. I mean, I think most relationships are like that, whether they're, with another person or with an animal, especially in the horse world. I mean, what other sport is like the horse world where you're competing in such a dangerous environment and you have to have the level of trust between an animal and a person that you do. Having the level of trust that we did, I had been there for that horse through literally everything and did not give up on him. And I mean, at that point, it was only fair that he could do something for me.
Yeah.
And and he's just been thriving since then when he was like, yeah, it's all about me. I'm like, yeah, sure, it's all about you.
I
Been
love that.
thriving.
Yeah. It's interesting to kind of be able to see and sort of behind the scenes look at what those relationships actually look like that lead to that awesome success.
Exactly. And relationships with your horse are what make them so successful. You see it over and over again where, you have a horse at the top of the sport that doesn't ever get back to the top of the sport because they don't have the same rider, or vice versa, a horse that jumps a meter 30 with everyone else but jumps a meter 60 for one person.
It just takes that right connection. Yeah. And I think that's something that ECBA could really help with if we have a sort of standard way of understanding personalities, then we can see like what about that worked and how can we create an environment where all these other horses that just need that extra little something to get them to that next level, how can we really understand their personalities and provide that
Right.
to them?
I definitely agree with that. And I love what you're doing. And again, making this information available to people is going to help so much.
I appreciate that. If this conversation has inspired you to learn more about your own horse's individual needs and motivations, you can get an ECBI profile at our website, which is www.equineperformanceidentities.com. If you enjoyed listening to this podcast and thought the content was interesting, I would love if you could share it with anyone else who you think would feel the same. I'd also really appreciate if you could take a quick minute to give this podcast a rating on whatever podcast platform you're listening on. And if you want to make sure that you don't miss any future episodes about the top horses in hunters, jumpers, equitation, dressage, eventing, reining, cutting, there's probably more that I'm forgetting, but make sure you click that follow button too. Well, thanks for listening to me, Caitlin Hendry, and I hope you tune in to the next episode of Inside Equine Minds.